for those of you who haven't seen my 11-year-old really freaking clever on it, this is the same reason I was loving it over a decade ago. This game is absolutely filled with gimmick levels.
A lot of people online are very negative about Kiddy Kong, so I figured somebody should just show up to be the positive force in that area.
Very curious what the alternate universe looks like, where the third game was Donkey Kong and Dixie Kong, and it was just like Diddy that was kidnapped.
I don't know, he's just so cute.
What's your favorite game? Come on the show, let me pick your brain. We've all got favorite games. No takes too insane here on Your Fave Game.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Josh Busker, and welcome to another episode of Your Fave Game, the online talk show where we chat with some of the most creative people from across the internet and ask them the most important question of all: what's your favorite game? Today we are joined by JoyContent, a YouTuber and Twitch streamer that also used to run the Twitter account known as Kiddy Kong Facts, and a staunch defender of the game we'll be talking about today. How you doing tonight, Joy?
Doing pretty good today.
Oh, that's good. So, the main question on everybody's mind, what's your favorite game? I guess before I ask the actual question, is this a difficult kind of question to be asked?
I think, considering my history online, I think it's pretty obvious that my favorite game would be Donkey Kong Country 3. There's certainly a few other contenders that I would say, like, I'm quite a big fan of Banjo-Tooie as well. But yeah, I think Donkey Kong Country 3 is pretty clearly a game that I love quite a bit because I was Kiddy Kong Facts for 3 years there.
Yeah. So just a bit of background history for the folks at home. I think you might have followed my account first, but I got a really big kick out of your Twitter account. If anyone's watched my the previous episode of the show on Donkey Kong Country 2, in that episode, I make pretty clear my favorite game of all the Donkey Kong games is Donkey Kong Country 3. And that is not it's not the most popular opinion. Most people it's one of the first two games of the trilogy they go for. And so the fact that you had a Twitter account specifically devoted to the character that everyone seems to hate the most from the most controversial Donkey Kong game, I loved it. I love that account, and I gave it a follow because yeah, just I support Kiddy Kong. I think that he's had a bit too much harshness thrown his way, and so I am proud to be presenting an episode today where we get to talk about what an awesome game Donkey Kong Country 3 is, because I think it's underrated.
Yep, and I definitely think it's quite underrated too, for sure.
And actually, yeah, just starting off on the Twitter account. Was there a specific reason that you decided to make an account kind of focused on Kiddy Kong, or what inspired that?
I mean, it was kind of mostly just that, like, a lot of people online are very negative about Kiddy Kong, so I figured somebody should just show up to be the positive force in that area.
You wanted to be the hero. You got to save Kiddy Kong's reputation.
Yep. And known Kiddy Kong hater John Cartwright definitely seemed to like my jokes pretty quickly. So that certainly encouraged me, because he followed me, I think, within like a couple months of me making that account. So certainly helps awesome. Encourage me to do that.
Yeah, fighting the good fight on Kiddy Kong's behalf.
And speaking of him, I did also get to play Donkey Kong Country 3 with him. And when we did so, he did admit that he doesn't hate the game. It's just Kiddy Kong that he hates. So...
Oh, it's just specifically the character. Yeah, so I think later in the episode I'm gonna dive a bit more into Kiddy Kong, because that is the character that almost seems to get the most discussion kind of out of the entire early Donkey Kong Country trilogy. But I guess just starting off, what is it exactly that kind of makes Donkey Kong Country 3 your favorite game, or how did you get introduced to it?
Well, I had all three of the country games as a kid for my Super Nintendo. I honestly don't really have the best memory of exactly why I played 3 the most, but I would have to assume that I think when I was a kid, I usually played games where I wasn't really playing them to beat them. I was just playing them just to exist in a fictional world. So like the worlds that kind of felt like more fleshed out were typically the ones that I was more interested in playing. Like I played a lot of the Nintendo 64 games because those you could just like hop into those worlds and just exist in them. And I think Donkey Kong Country 3 is basically like the one Super Nintendo game that I owned that has a bit more of like an overworld. Because like obviously there's like Link to the Past and there's all the RPGs, but I never owned any of those. So when
Mhm.
you compare like the overworld of Donkey Kong Country 3 to even just like the first two games in the series, there's definitely a lot more there, and you get like, there's all these different NPCs that just kind of exist just to be there for you to talk to and like just
Mhm.
exist in their world and all that stuff. So like I feel like, and that's a thing that doesn't really get brought up that much, is that like Donkey Kong Country 3 isn't just a 2D platformer, it's also kind of an adventure game essentially. It's not like the
Th
most in-depth adventure game, but I would say it is like kind of halfway between a 2D platformer and an adventure game.
Yeah, they definitely got, way more ambitious kind of with those adventure aspects. Because yeah, the first 2 games, are very much linear. Like they technically have like the overworld map, and there might be like a couple different directions in the second game, like getting to the lost world and everything. But for the most part, it's just a little bit of window dressing kind of in between these linear 2D levels. But yeah, Donkey Kong Country 3, the world map itself is a lot more in depth because you have like the boat to kind of travel between the different individual worlds, and you need to upgrade that boat to access different areas. You have all the banana bird caves, which are kind of an additional side quest that's mostly focused on the overworld rather than just being something you find in the actual levels. And yeah, as you said, kind of having all these NPCs and these characters that live in the world. It's not just, oh, every world there's going to be Funky Kong and there's going to be Candy Kong. It's no, there's this specific bear lives in this specific world, and he does this specific thing and is part of this specific side quest. Like it really is a lot more, yeah, ambitious, kind of than the adventure aspects that they just tease a little bit in the previous game.
Yeah, for sure. And I like how like a lot of those bears, you can kind of just go talk to them, and they'll have like a different thing to say over the course of the game, even if that part is not necessarily like tied into any of the quests. Like obviously there's what's his name? I think he's Blunder Bear. Blunder Bear is his name. He's the one that like he lives right next to Lake Orangutanga and Cremwood Forest, where he will tell you about the Lost World, and slowly over the course of the game, if you keep going back there, he will keep having new dialogue to like slowly push you towards finding the Lost World. And then like Bizarre Bear, who owns the shop at the beginning of the game, after you buy his things, you can then talk to him again, and you'll have like things to tell you about. Like there's a guy that just moved into the castle up north, and that like you're probably going to be able to get that dialogue before you can even see that castle, because you only have to buy like the seashell, and then you can
Mhm.
talk to him about the castle, and you'll slowly feel about like he'll tell you a bit more about the world before you can even see most of it. And I think that just kind of captured my imagination as a kid a bit more than the first two did. As you mentioned, there's also the boats as well, and that's like basically like a Metroidvania type approach of just when you start, you can see these rocks that you can't go over. So then you figure out, oh well, I have to get the hovercraft to go over those rocks, and then you'll see the waterfalls, and then you need the jet skis to go up the waterfalls, and it keeps growing like that.
Yeah, they do some really cool stuff with the boat, and yeah, it really it adds to that experience of like kind of feeling like you're living in a world, especially when you're a kid. Because nowadays it might seem like a little bit simplistic that just like, oh, the NPC, um, like has new dialogue as you complete each world, but that was way beyond what any of the other like Donkey Kong Country games had kind of provided. And yeah, it made you feel like, oh wait, what's this castle he's talking about? And that foreshadowing, then once you finally do get a boat that's like powerful enough that you can get up to the north part of the map, it's like, oh, there's the castle that was kind of hinted at like all this time ago. And another thing I really like, just with the openness of the world and how it feels a bit more of an actual place rather than just, again, like window dressing between the levels, is the few times where it does kind of let you pick whether, do I want to go to this island with all the mechanical stuff in the factories first, or do I want to go kind of to the water world, and you can choose which of those that you want to do, instead of it just being this is world 3, this is world 4. It's just a little bit of choice that just fleshes everything out a little bit.
Yeah. And then also, if you do the Game Boy Advance remake, you also get to choose between the last three world. Well, the not the last three worlds, because like the final world is separate, but you get to choose between K3, Razor Ridge, and the New World simultaneously. You can pick either
Yeah.
three of those. in that order.
Just mentioning the Game Boy Advance port a little bit. I haven't I've played them a little bit, but most of my experience was with the Super Nintendo version. But I know a lot of people are really big fans of the Game Boy Advance port, both for the entire Donkey Kong Country trilogy, because I think they did a good job porting them. But the third game in particular, because it got an entirely new soundtrack from David Wise, since he didn't do the soundtrack for the original Super Nintendo version. And I'm a little bit nostalgia biased where I still really enjoy and kind of prefer the Super Nintendo tracks just because I'm way more used to them. But it is very cool that they kind of got David Wise to complete his vision for the trilogy's soundtrack using that port as an opportunity to do that.
I have to admit, I don't really like that the GBA soundtrack. Um, it could be nostalgia bias as well, but like I only recently played the Game Boy Advance remake, and
Hmm.
I don't like most of the songs on that soundtrack. I gotta be honest. I think the bigger
I
issue is it has really weird sound effect choices, and I think that bothers me more than the music does. Because, like, for example, there's the Crackshot Croc level where you're getting chased by a crosshair, and for whatever reason,
mhm.
they decided it would be a good idea to have an evil laugh every single time it shoots, and it's like a 3 second long evil laugh. And it shoots every
Oh,
10 seconds
interesting.
throughout the entire level. Personally, I prefer the Super Nintendo version, but to each their own.
I've always, in anything I've heard from the Game Boy Advance version, I've been like, oh, that's a good sounding David Wise track, like just because he has kind of a distinctive sound to a lot of his music. But I do personally think that the Super Nintendo soundtrack just fits with everything more. And I don't know if that's just again a case of me being used to it. But also, as you said, like, yeah, the Game Boy Advance and the Super Nintendo just have different sound chips, and it's also like a lot of those Game Boy Advance ports, they'd like try putting in the voice sound effects. I know that both the Link to the Past and like the Mario World ports are both Game Boy Advance ports of Super Nintendo games, and they add in like, oh, every time Link swings his sword, he does like the Wind Waker sound effect of him swinging a sword, or Mario has like the wahoos and all that, and
Yeah.
it's like the Game Boy Advance sound card just wasn't quite there to not have all of those like sound effects sound very chippy or crunched, whatever the proper sound term is. I'm a musician. I totally, I totally
Yeah.
should know the proper terms for this, but I don't quite.
I did also find it funny how in the Game Boy Advance remake, they decided that King K. Rool was going to reuse Chunky Kong's voice clips, which is just very funny. Because
Oh,
I
is
like,
that who they use for King K. Rool? That's funny.
yeah, because like I know the DK64 sound clips very well, so it's just very weird hearing Chunky Kong coming out of King K. Rool. And then they also
Hmm.
reused Tiny's sound clips are reused for Dixie, and then I think there is some Diddy Kong ones for Kiddy Kong as well, which is it's kind of
Oh,
funny.
that would. I've never really paid attention to the sound effects or what they changed in that for the port, but that actually would also drive me crazy if I picked up on that. Just because,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like, no, these sound effects are associated with this character, and then if they just start switching them around, it's like, no, you're mixing up my monkeys.
I will say that that port does have like a whole new world though in it, and I'm not really the biggest fan of the levels in it, but there are interesting ideas there where like you have one of the like two tree levels and then it's half flooded, so it's partially a water level as well, which is a very interesting concept there.
Hmm.
Like they definitely decided to like try to shake up all of the levels for that new world there.
Yeah, and it's always nice whenever like a port does decide to add something new, like a little bonus to someone that has already played the original game and might be looking for something a little bit new.
Speaking of levels and worlds though, something else I quite enjoy about it is that you don't really have like the lava world and then like the ice world. Instead, they kind of keep it all like mixed up throughout the entire adventure so that like it feels a bit more cohesive of a world, I think, to have like you spread out all of like the factory levels across the entire game and stuff like that, so it feels a lot more connected and you instead of just having like you know K3 is the only place where you'll find the snow levels and stuff like that.
Because yeah, the first Donkey Kong Country game really kind of leaned into like these are like natural environments. Like here's the icy mountain level, and here's like the ancient ruins level. But it was all kind of everything was kept kind of close to that like jungle like animals theme. with a little bit of like the industrial side of like the factory and everything, but it was very it was very kind of determined in all of its theming. And then Donkey Kong Country 2, they get a little bit wackier, but it is still like this is the lava level, this is the theme park level, and it's yeah, very
Yeah.
specific. But yeah, this one they do have kind of recurring level themes, but they spread those out. But the way that they kind of incorporate it all on the world map, it like you can see like, oh, this is another like building, or you can see like the mountain where why this is a mountain level, even if the entire world isn't mountain themed. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a really nice mixture of having that wide variety of different themes, but still having everything like cohesive and feel like interconnected. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can definitely notice that, like, there's the mill levels, and then the mill levels are, I think they're only in like the first 3 or 4 worlds, and then you have the factory levels kind of sort of replace them. So over the course of the game, it does start to change, but it changes in a bit more of a natural way instead of it just being, you know, completely segmented by the world types.
And the other big thing, and this is kind of getting into the reason why I really, really like Donkey Kong Country 3. Um, for those of you who haven't seen my 11-year-old really freaking clever on it, this is the same reason I was loving it over a decade ago. This game is absolutely filled with gimmick levels. Like after the first
Yeah.
4 in the game, every level just commits to a really specific mechanic or gimmick or enemy that the entire level will be built around. And so it'll bounce back and forth between these like mill levels or like the jungle levels, like in the Kremwood Forest and everything. But each of them is kind of completely unique in like, oh, it uses this mechanic in this way, or this mill level has doors that you have to open this way, while another mill level, the same doors open with a different mechanic. And there's just such a uniqueness to every level, and they super commit to that gimmickness that I don't think gimmickness is a word, but they just super commit to that idea, and it really lends a cool variety to the game that they kind of keep in balance with that naturalism of the world and how everything kind of gels together.
On that topic, I do also like that, like, if you think about all the bosses in the game, none of them are fought in exactly the same way, which also kind of helps keep things original. Because, like,
Hmm.
sure, you normally use barrels, but like in the first one, you're feeding it barrels. Then the second one, you're trying to like jump into its head with a barrel, and then like obviously you have Ellie fighting one of the bosses. So it's like every single time you're doing a boss, you're fighting it in a different way. So again, it's like keeping it very original over the course of the entire game. I would say, like,
Hmm.
obviously the only one that's really similar is the 2K rule fights. I mean, even like the 2 chaos fights are different because in the second one you're using barrels, where in the first one you're jumping on his head.
They add a little something else to kind of keep track of. And I think that's what I really enjoy about the game is because of all this variety, it's all coming off the back of Donkey Kong Country 2, which in my opinion, that is a really well balanced. It's a difficult platformer, but it has a really good flow to it and just one of like the best 2D platformers ever designed. And I think
Yeah,
like coming off of that, um they were able to just go completely to hog wild with the third game after having those 2 previous games to like learn the engine, really figure out like what works with this kind of gameplay we've come up with. And so by the third game, they're able to go, yeah, we can have these like crazy ambitious bosses. None of them are the same. None of the levels are the same. We're just throwing all the ideas that we've had over the last like few years of working within this trilogy's engine and everything it can do.
I think something worth noting is that they kind of did the same thing with Banjo Tooie to an extent, because with Banjo
Hmm.
Tooie and DKC3, they both kind of went like, okay, so we have the core gameplay and the core idea of it completely locked in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shift it into like a bit more of like an interconnected world, and then try to like make things a bit more unique in certain ways. Like, Banjo Tooie is kind of also an adventure game in that, in a way that both Banjo Kazooie and DK64 aren't, because like all the
Hmm.
worlds are interconnected and stuff like that. So basically they decided like, well, we have very good gameplay that people quite enjoy, so we're gonna change our priority in the next one, and we're not going to change the gameplay that much, and just kind of try to expand upon the gameplay while also focusing in on like making a more of an interconnected world and stuff like that, right?
I've found I think I must have tweets like specifically labeling myself this, but like I am the overly ambitious Rareware sequel defender because I love whenever they kind of do that because I totally can like hear and understand like criticisms of Banjo-Tooie or Donkey Kong 64 where people are like it's too big, there's too many different kinds of collectibles, or there's like I get all lost and turned around trying to keep track of like how this Banjo-Tooie world connects to this one and what I have to bring from this location to the other. Like I totally understand those complaints, but that's what I love about Banjo-Tooie and Donkey Kong Country 3 is that they might be, I'm putting this into quotation marks, like too much, but I kind of love that they do that and that they weren't afraid to get a bit too ambitious and be like, yeah, no, there is this entire family of bears that you need to track down over like 4 different worlds and like get together and get fast food for them, as opposed to just like the original Banjo Kazooie where it's like find one bear, get one Jiggy. And yeah, they made things so much more complicated, which I can totally see why that might go too far for some people, but I see it as them just like seeing how far they can push their engines and like what kind of cohesive adventure spaces they can build inside the same engines that they've previously made just like very well polished, well rounded masterpieces in.
The way I like to say it is that Banjo Kazooie is Rare's Mario 64, and I think Banjo Tooie would more so be like their Ocarina of Time, essentially, because it's like, they're trying to build out a world instead of trying to just do the platforming. And then I guess from like that perspective, you would have like, DKC 3 is basically their Link to the Past sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It even has a trading quest, which Zelda games have. Well, I guess technically there's like 2 trading quests in there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I've so often just over the years, whenever I talk about why I really like Donkey Kong Country 3, I've really have focused in on like every level has a gimmick. I love that, like just more and more creativity and variety. I love that that's what they focused on, but they really did like expand those adventure game aspects. I'm glad that that's kind of something you've honed in on because yeah, there's is full on trading quests and figuring out, okay, what does this bear want, which of the other bears is he talking about, oh I've heard this name mentioned before, I'm gonna go to that shop. And like yeah, that the whole like interlocking systems there is just way more than any of the other kind of Donkey Kong games in the trilogy, and that they definitely never brought back those aspects in like Tropical Freeze and Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is really interesting. What are your thoughts on the Retro Studios Donkey Kong games? Have you played those or have much
I
experience?
have played them. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of what they did to the duo mechanic, and that kind of sours me on them a little bit. Like they're definitely very good games. It's just that for me personally, I really enjoy having 2 different characters to play as, and
Hmm.
having like that mechanic where you have very different types of gameplay when you're playing as Dixie versus Kitty, which I think is like perfected in DXC 3. Personally, I would say DXC 3 has like the perfect duo mechanic, and then they just kind of change it so you just have Donkey Kong and a power up in the retro games.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely a way different approach in the retro ones. Cause yeah, anytime you get an extra Kong, they mix it up a bit in like Tropical Freeze by making that it's not just Diddy Kong, but it's still essentially just, yeah, it's a power up for DK instead of being, oh, I'm 2 characters that I'm switching between. And yeah, that's another thing that Donkey Kong Country 3 I think really expands on and takes the most advantage of compared to the other 2 games. Cause Donkey Kong Country 1, it has a little bit of that like Donkey Kong's the heavy one, Diddy Kong's the light one with like what enemies you can defeat, but you can't put Diddy on your back or you can't put Donkey Kong on Diddy's back or anything. That like hold the A button to like uh do the oh my god, I'm blanking on the term.
I think
Piggyback
it's just
ride and
called I think it's called Team Up Move. I think it's just what they call
yeah,
it.
Yeah, the team up moves, and you can do those in Donkey Kong Country too. But because both Diddy and Dixie are light, and their main difference is kind of just like Dixie's hair twirl thing, they don't really get to use that in puzzles. Whereas like Donkey Kong Country 3, it's like, oh, I need to throw Dixie Kong up here as Kitty because Kitty's the only one strong enough to throw her up there. Whereas other puzzles might be, oh, Dixie Kong has to throw him because I need to break this hole in the floor. And yeah, it's like kind of a really simple way to differentiate between the characters, but they actually like embrace the differences in 3 compared to the other games. And then yeah, just completely kind of simplified that mechanic in the retro games. The retro studios games, I should say. That I could get confused there.
I think DKC2 did a lot of heavy lifting in improving the duo mechanic, because, like, you know, yes, you have two different characters in the first one, but they don't really feel like a team as much until you get to 2. And then 3 takes what 2 did and just kind of expands upon it a little bit more to just make it that much better. I guess I didn't technically mention that much about like the gimmicky levels, but that definitely is something I quite enjoy about this game. I think it's something that really only Super Mario Brothers Wonder has really scratched that same itch for me. In like every single level has this very unique concept to it. Obviously,
Yeah.
there are gimmick levels in DC 1 and 2, but they're not. I feel like they're not as plentiful. Whereas in DC 3, it's basically just outside of like the first world, where some of them are a bit basic. You just have
Yeah.
every single level has a totally unique idea.
Yeah, I think Donkey Kong Country 2 has more gimmicky levels than the average platformer, but like Donkey Kong Country 3, it is genuinely, once you get past like the first like 4 levels in just the first world, it is like genuinely every level past that has some kind of unique mechanic to the level. Like it does not let
Yeah,
up hardly at all. Um, which I respect that like there must have been at some point where they had a discussion where it was like, do we really want this for like every level? Maybe we should like throw in just like some basic ones like to just to space it out a bit. But I like that they absolutely committed to like, nope, this is what the game is.
yeah. I kind of have to wonder, like, did they have like an open team structure where just like anybody could submit an idea, or like how did they come up with so many unique ideas? Because they're like every single one of them, I think, is good. Basically, and there's just so many ideas there.
Because I've done a lot of speculation about like how, oh, like this game is so good because they were able to like make perfection with Donkey Kong Country 2, and then this was them going crazy. But I would love to actually hear from like the dev team, yeah, how they were kind of structured and how they came up with the levels. Because I hope it was like that open kind of structure of, okay, everyone can pitch a gimmick, or like any of the programmers, if you can like make something, we'll try that out. Or I also wonder how many of the levels were like previously thought of as potentially being in like Donkey Kong Country 2, and then were just they never got around to actually making or programming that mechanic. And once they got to the third game where they're just throwing everything out there, whether that's when they finally got to use some of those. I would love to interview someone on the dev team specifically for Donkey Kong Country 3, because I think that would be a really unique kind of time for game dev of coming up with all these gimmicks. And also the fact that this is like the last hurrah for the Super Nintendo. Like, you know, everyone's moving to 3D games and the N64 after this. So like, what are you getting out of your system before you kind of leave 2D platformers behind for a bit?
Yeah, definitely. I've tried looking up like development stuff about TC3, but it doesn't really seem like there's that much out there. So
Well,
people definitely
that's
should
that's the
try to
thing,
interview them.
because the first 2 games I feel like get a lot of extra scrutiny, or get a little bit more um kind of access to like what's the story behind like how Diddy Kong was made. Because there I know
Yeah,
there is a lot of guys from like older Rareware that are very open on Twitter about like, oh, this is how this character design came about and everything. Um but yeah, because Donkey Kong Country 3 is a bit of the underrated one, I think that's the one with less info floating out there. So any DKC devs that want to talk about the third game specifically, would love to have you on.
yeah. I think it also obviously the dev team is different for DXC3, and I think the people that were involved in DXC3 are largely not as active on social media. Like obviously, Evelyn, she was Fisher at the time, but she's now Novakovic. She's not really anywhere online anymore. I think she basically
Mm.
retired from video games and stuff. And then I know
Yeah.
Mark Stevenson's not very active on Twitter. He does have one, but he's not really on there very much, and he's the character designer.
I want to buy him a beer or something because just completely random thought that popped into my head. Um, the chainsaw bees in Donkey Kong Country 3 are one of like my favorite character designs, like of all video games, because the original, like both Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 use the same bee design, and it's a really good bee design. Just the bee with like
Yeah,
spikes coming out and stingers everywhere, like all timer 10 out of 10 bee design. And then I think one upping that to like, actually, this new area of the Donkey Kong Country world has chainsaw bees is like
yep,
11 out of 10. Such a cool escalation. Sorry, that just popped into my head. I've been keeping that inside for like 20 years of just how much I love the chainsaw bees.
yeah. Speaking of enemy design, I definitely think a lot of them are underappreciated because people kind of look at them and they think there isn't really a cohesive structure to them. Whereas,
Mhm.
like, if you really think about it, people will talk about like a lot of them are ugly, but that I think that's on purpose because they're supposed to be K. Rulenstein's monsters, right? So like
Mhm.
some of them are mechanized, like the buzzes, and then the ones that are like the bazooka is given a giant cannon. The owls are given giant cannons, and then like you have like the ugly crumlings that are clearly experimented on to make like stronger and stuff like that.
Oh, I like that. I've never thought of that before, tying into the mad scientist theme, but that totally works. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know DKC 3 can get a bit of like a rap for like the character designs feeling different, but I kind of like that they embrace like a little bit of the more cartoony vibe and a little bit more exaggerated. Again, upgrading from a bee with a lot of spikes to a bee with a literal chainsaw butt.
yeah,
Just it's a really nice escalation. But I really like that headcanon that the that there's also a reasoning for it, that yeah, this is the mad scientist game. So there's all
yeah.
these experiments running amok.
The character that you're supposed to think is like the main villain for most of the game is a robot. So
Yes, yeah,
it,
the
a lot of
chaos.
it's supposed to be like man-made. Well, I guess K. Rule made monsters and stuff like that. That's why they call him Baron K. Rulenstein. It's because you're supposed to think Frankenstein.
We love it. We love it. Speaking of character designs that might be controversial, I guess we're gonna get into the big guy himself. Uh why do you think people hate Kiddy Kong so much? I think we're both Kiddy Kong defenders, but the internet at large doesn't seem to be a big fan.
Honestly, don't really get why people don't like him so much. Like, I understand people don't really like baby characters that much, but like, I
Mhm.
don't know, he's just so cute. I don't get why people don't like him. Like, he's just a big, silly, cute baby. Like, I don't know what there is to hate. I just think he's
Yeah, and
cute.
he's never honestly super, like, obviously whenever you loses him and like it's doing the little fade out as you lost alive, like obviously he does a little baby cry, then he goes ah thing. But other
Yeah,
than that, like he doesn't really do a lot of like annoying baby things, or the usual things that make people like dislike baby characters is like the fact that they talk like goo 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 gaga and like, or do annoying things like that. But he's like a silent protagonist for the most part, except for whenever he dies and goes but even that's just for like a few seconds. It's not like Baby Mario in Yoshi's Island, like blaring at you with an alarm for 10 seconds.
I guess part of it is that like you have the really cool characters of DK and Diddy in the first two, and then it's just now you have a baby and a
Mhm.
girl. So hopefully you want to be either a girl or a baby. And I guess
I am very curious what the alternate universe looks like, where the third game was Donkey Kong and Dixie Kong, and it was just like Diddy that was kidnapped.
I know people talk about that a lot, but I don't know. I think DK would kind of overshadow Dixie if he was playable, and that would be the issue. Is that this is supposed to be Dixie's game, right? And then if you put DK in there, then it's not really Dixie's game.
Yeah, and it's kind of like an odd combo, and it's like odd stakes where it's like you go from the second game being, oh my god, the main hero's been kidnapped, to oh my god, the sidekick's been kidnapped, but luckily we have the better sidekick that can float with us. So why are we rescuing Diddy again? But yeah, I'm curious how much of like the reception of the game overall is just because people kind of locked onto that. Kiddy Kong's a baby character, and he's got a gross design with the weird feet and everything. Which he has a little bit of weird feet, but I don't know. I find it lovable. I've never gotten the disdain for the character. I just think he's a weird looking baby dude.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's cute with his idle animation where he's just like picking at his pajama feet and then he
Yeah, and he
accidentally
like
hits himself and
snaps it.
falls over.
And he like to all the credit gameplay wise, like he is the one where it becomes a mechanic of like, oh, okay, I've got the heavy Kong. There's this crack in the floor. I gotta throw him up so that he like lands in the crack, and that'll get me to the bonus barrel. Like Donkey Kong, they never really utilized his weight other than that he could beat the heavy duty Kremlings like in the first game. But in this, it's a lot more of like a puzzle mechanic that can be used alongside like defeating the bigger enemies as Kiddy Kong. So he holds his own. He's just as powerful as Donkey Kong. Not to get into power scaling or anything, but we support our boy.
I kind of wish they used those mechanics a bit more because I feel like it's only really used like 2 or 3 times in the game. But it is nice that it is there and there's a bit more variety to the two characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's
Yeah,
bouncing on
I
water as
could.
well. That's, again, not
Oh
used
yeah,
that much.
I could definitely see them doing more like puzzles where it's like you're trying to balance scales or something, and you need to throw like Kitty on one or whatever. But yeah,
So I guess speaking of like character mechanics, I also think this game has the best animal buddies. I gotta be honest. I know that's kind of blasphemy because it doesn't have Rambi, but like, let's be honest, Rambi doesn't really offer a lot of unique gameplay mechanics. Whereas I think all of the ones that are in DKC3 all give you very different levels to play just by like their core abilities. So I feel like they definitely lend a bit more to like the gimmicky nature of DKC3, especially Ellie,
I,
because there's like 4 different abilities she has, and they all come into different levels very differently.
that's the thing is that like Rambi's an iconic design, and it always feels good as Rambi to just run into enemies with the horn and everything. But yeah, all of the animal buddies in Donkey Kong Country 3 are more complex and have more stuff, have more mechanics that again can be used to make really gimmicky levels out of. Like the spider squidder is amazing. Like there's the whole making platforms and building your own platforming sections, and you can also shoot like friggin' Mega Man style at any enemies coming
Yeah,
your way. And yeah, Ellie's got all of the benefits of Rambi, except she can't just run into people. But there's the whole like water mechanic that is utilized, where you can shoot, you can arc your shots, you have to like conserve your ammo. And then there's also just the super endearing, she's super afraid of rats. And so they can use that as like, it's a weakness to that specific animal buddy,
yeah,
but they're able to make some really cool gimmicky levels out of it, both from like, okay, in this level, it's kind of a stealth thing. You need to avoid the rats, or hit them with a barrel so that you can get through an area, all the way to Ellie gets scared at the start of a level. She's going to run the whole damn time because she got spooked. It's just, yeah, Rambi's got a bit of like extra iconic points, but in terms of what you can do gameplay wise, I gotta side with Ellie. It's the hot take. I'll support you in it.
they also made Purple Squawks like a whole separate character named Quawks
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yeah.
Whereas now you have 2 very different kinds of birds, where one of them is shooting pellets at stuff, and the other one has to pick up barrels. So you have like very different kinds of levels you can make just by having the 2 different birds there, even though you can fly with both of them.
Again, like I wonder what the process was for figuring out these levels, because I could totally see some designer being like, okay, so how about the bird in this one? Actually, we use the barrels, and I have all these ideas for flying barrel puzzles. But then there's another designer that says, oh, well, I actually had some cool ideas based on the like shooting mechanic that we used in the second game. And then someone gets to be like, guys, we'll just use both birds. We'll have 2 different birds.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really want to know the story behind that. But again, it's like not many platforming games would have multiple flying like companions. They would have one flying power up, and that's all you're going to get. And that mechanic might get explored in like 1 or 2 levels. But in this, they like full on have multiple flying animal buddies and multiple animal buddies with shooting mechanics, but that all just work different enough that you can build a full gimmicked level around just one of them and it feels satisfying.
yeah. And like in DKC2, when you have the purple bird, it's just like well, this is not as good as the green one because the green one can actually attack and then the purple one can't. And then
Yeah, it's a
instead in this
full-on
one, they're both
downgrade.
good.
They actually found like a utility and something that could be done and make it not be disappointing.
And then obviously Unguard is still here, and that's just like, well, now you can attack when you're underwater, which is a mechanic in its on its own because you
Mhm.
can't do it otherwise.
And I like that they also Donkey Kong Country 2 does this a little bit, but they make like a bit of a difference between whether you're riding an animal buddy or you're actually like transforming into it. Um and it's just like a tiny little additional layer of complexity on like how they work where again it's like every level is just has something a bit different going on. It's very interesting.
Yeah, in three they definitely use transforming way more, and I feel like that's just because you have to never lose the animal buddy in the level because literally the entire level is based on them.
Yeah, they fully commit to like, yeah, this is a Squawks level. This is a Squitter level. This isn't maybe you get some extra bonus barrels with Squitter. It's no, you need to be this guy.
There's really only like the one level where you're all of them, and then I think
Mhm.
like the first level, I think that's really the only times you ride them. Maybe a couple more
Yeah.
that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, they definitely like keep the mechanic from the older games, but they only like utilize it where they want you to be like switching between them, or it's just, oh, it's an additional bonus thing that we have Ellie for this level. Um,
Yeah,
but again, it's like another like little thing where it's like, oh, there's multiple kind of modes the animal buddies can be in. And just a little bit more ambitious than you'd kind of expect. Speaking of the gimmicky levels, do you have like a favorite level or one that just like pops up in your mind as like if you think of the game, this is what pops in your head?
probably say Crackshot Croc does, which is the crosshair level for people that don't
Yeah.
know the names.
Yeah. No,
Like,
that's just a very unique and very memorable
yeah,
level.
especially when you do the bonus level where you get to play as the crosshair, which is just very cool to just get to do
Yes,
that.
yeah. Yeah. That's just so fun and feels like such a nice now the tables have turned.
And then they sort of kind of bring that enemy back for DK64, but not exactly necessarily the same one.
For me, what always comes into mind is because they don't have minecart levels. It's like the sled levels, but the sled levels that are inside like the pipes, that's kind of always the first thing that pops into my head because just the amount of gimmicks they're able to do in those pipe levels in general, but then also with like the pipe sled levels, just that there's multiple kind of approaches to that. Um, and I always love the minecart style levels, and so the fact that they add gimmicks even into that style is so cool.
I definitely like how you have the snow ones where it's just you're just jumping in the toboggan, and then in when you're in the pipe, you have like the top railing to grab onto, so it shifts up the gameplay. You can have gimmicky levels even in just the sledding levels because you have two different ideas.
Gimmicks within gimmicks.
Boss wise, I definitely like Bleak the most personally. If you have played the swanky minigames throughout the level, you're kind of training yourself up, and then you find out, oh, I have to fight a boss like this. But then it's also simple enough where even if you don't ever touch the minigames, you can figure it out relatively quickly.
Yeah, it's just a really nice kind of like fleshing out of the swanky mini games, and yeah, it rewards you if you are like fully kind of embracing yourself in the world and like, oh yeah, I can check out swanky every time I go through here, and then by the time you get to that boss you're like, oh okay. I guess as we kind of start wrapping things up, um let's say next Nintendo Direct they announce the Switch 2 is we're gonna launch with a new Donkey Kong Country game. And they don't announce any details other than that. What would you want to see? Whether it's like a specific dev team, whether you want them to bring the buddy system like back, but like what would if they were doing either Donkey Kong Country Returns 3 or Donkey Kong Country 4, whatever they would call it, but a big return to the series. Um, what would you like to see from the next game?
Well, the obvious answer is it has to have Kiddy Kong because he's the
Yeah.
only one we're missing so far. We have the other three TKC original trilogy playable characters, but we're missing Kiddy Kong. Dev team wise, I briefly mentioned it, but Super Mario Brothers Wonder, I think, is the closest we've ever gotten to DKC 3 2, essentially. Like, I guess
Mhm.
you have Ukulele in the Possible Lair, but I feel like that one, that's really only comparable in the sense that, like, it has the overworld stuff, whereas
Mhm.
Super Mario Brothers Wonder leans into, like, the gimmicky stuff. So I would say, like,
Yes.
I know Nintendo probably wouldn't ever do it because that team is probably just the 2D Mario team now. But if you want to pull some people off of that team and make it another team inside of Nintendo, that's who I would want to have do the next Donkey Kong Country. I would have to say, even just get like the director involved would be very nice. Gameplay wise, I would say I would love to see the overworld idea come back and just have like a better overworld that you can actually like invest yourself in and meet all these NPCs that don't really have like direct gameplay purposes for being there, and just have, it's more fleshed out like that. And then obviously animal buddies would be nice, and also like the original duo mechanic would be nice.
Yeah, a bit more leaning back into like the classic trilogy feel of controlling two Kongs rather than just the I'm Donkey Kong and when I get a buddy, they're my power up.
Yeah.
That would be the big thing for me. And just the other big thing, and this was what I really liked about Tropical Freeze, even though it kind of deviated from the formula in other ways, I liked the creativity and kind of the aesthetics of Tropical Freeze, like the fact there's the world that's like all just based around like a juice factory and like or a popsicle factory, and how that gets made, kind of being told throughout the world, or the Savannah themed one. Just having like these new kind of unique themes that still feel like they gel with everything we've seen before from Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
I hope they keep that up. Just like new varied locations we haven't seen before. Instead, like I wouldn't want another just like, oh, here's a grass world, here's a lava world, here's an ice world, like a Mario game would get. Like I feel like Donkey Kong needs a bit more specific theming. And I hope that they continue that for whatever the next game is.
I think the Super Mario Bros. Wonder team is who I would give it to, though, just because they understand like the gimmicky idea the best.
Yes, yeah. Retro's they've got Metroid Prime 4 on their plate. I hope they kick some butt with that one. But yeah, someone from the Mario team, or someone that is gonna like embrace that gimmicky or like just ambitious nature of throwing everything at these levels. I would agree with that. Mario Wonder was the closest we've gotten to that chaotic but good creative energy that I really like about Donkey Kong Country 3.
I would also like to see them make a new Kong at some point, because they haven't done that since the Rare buyout. I don't think they've done one.
A new Kong cousin would be nice. Or even honestly, they could even bring back Lanky, and I wouldn't be I wouldn't be too upset. But yeah, there's a whole lot they could be doing with the series, and I really hope that the Switch 2 sees some good Donkey Kong Country style games.
I mean, they have to be doing something with the IP, considering they put them in the movie and are giving them a theme park.
Such a big part. Yeah, there's got to be something. Something's brewing. So fingers crossed, Nintendo. But yeah, no. I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming on the show, because Donkey Kong Country 3 is very underrated. There's not a lot of people that say they would like hate it, but I feel like it just does not get the proper credit that it deserves alongside the other two Donkey Kong Country games. And so I appreciate the good fight you've been putting up all these years with the Kiddy Kong facts account. There are dozens of us Donkey Kong Country 3 defenders. And yeah, I hope this episode, if anyone's like listening to it and never really given Donkey Kong Country 3 a fair shake, I hope they do after listening to us rant about how much we love it for almost an hour. So yeah, Joy, if people want to find you online, where can they do that?
You can find me on various places by the name of JoyContent. I do Twitch streams like once or twice a week. I do YouTube videos occasionally. I also have a Doctor Who podcast where myself and my co-host are watching through the entirety of classic Doctor Who, because we haven't watched most of it before. So that is called Genesis of the Doctor. And we do that every 2 weeks. We release an episode of that. We're almost done the first Doctor now. It's been a very long trip through the first Doctor stories. There's a lot there.
There's a whole lot of serials.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for coming on the show so much, Joy. You have been a joy to have on the show.
Why, thank you.
And yeah, for anyone watching, I'm Josh Busker. You can see that on the channel name. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, I will see you next week with another favorite game. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely evening. So have a good night, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.